Okay. Title of this section is on setbacks and disappointments, and certainly you have had a lot of those, but I got to get organized here. We meet in the midst of a nation brought to the verge of moral, political, and material ruin. That is a declaration from the Grange in 1874. The declaration goes on and on. I won't read it now, but it fits the present perfectly. Our country and farmers have been there before. The message of hope is that the Grange and the farmers' revolt became the populist party, and the populist political party did not survive, but the concept of antitrust did. The battle lasted over 50 years. We hope it goes a lot faster this time, but they had many, many setbacks. Another statement that I love is we're not enemies to capital, but we oppose the tyranny of monopoly. I'm going to talk about regulatory failure and try to give you some insight into issues dealing with government economists and their influence on the rules. Regulatory failure is a symptom, not a disease. The disease is the corporate control of government. So I'm going to be talking about symptoms, not so much about the disease. The Farmers' Revolt led to the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, breakup of the Meat Packers and Stockyard Act of 1921, and the Capper-Volstead Act of 1922, which was intended for farmers to get together to countervail corporate power. It didn't work out for a variety of reasons, but there was a whole package of legislation. Evolution, the original intent was for fair and free competition. Fair competition back then meant something much different. It meant many buyers, many sellers. Unlike the free market ideology that's been inflicted on a lot of us recently. Early on in antitrust law, and I'm an economist, not an attorney, so this is an economist interpretation, the courts decided fair was difficult. That's strange because the whole legal system is about justice and fairness. They decided, well, we really can't handle that, and so over time, through 100 years of case law and bad influence from economists or influence from bad economists, it's evolved to Judge Posner, very influential Chicago school economist and federal judge, that the only goal of antitrust law should be to promote efficiency in the economic sense. Efficiency has absolutely nothing to do with fairness. So fairness has been gutted. And recent events have really gutted the fairness wording in the Packers and Stockyard Act. I'm not going to talk about the usual stuff of bureaucratic failure and a lot of government regulators and cops just, passing time. But we got where we are with a very permissive view allowing mergers and acquisitions. Antitrust law sets up a whole process for approving large mergers and acquisitions that would lead to market power. Department of Justice and Federal Trade Commission oversee this, but starting in 1980, a very permissive attitude toward mergers and acquisitions, and all of those were rubber stamped. Had they not been rubber stamped, we would have a different world right now. So the too big to fail was a result of that, but it also means too big to prosecute, too big to break up, probably. I want to talk briefly about specific instance, that occurred in the gypsum battle by the giant ag business hiring economic hitmen, and then the government cops and regulators relying on those for their analysis. And then talk about the competition workshops and what I call legislative thuggery. Some of you know that OCM put in a Freedom of Information request for the documents relating to the whole gypsum process. Some very interesting bedtime reading. I'm just going to pull a few things from it. One is the two comments used extensively for the cost-benefit analysis of the proposed gypsum rules are an Informa study prepared for the National Marketing Association and submitted by NCBA and National Poultry Producers Council, and a study by an ag economist, Thomas Elam, done for the National Chicken Council. Dudley can give you a blow-by-blow account of this, but this is what happened in spite of his best efforts. Another quote. Back up a second. Some of you, like Matt Calicrate, know the history of Informa. Informa was Sparks Commodities. Sparks cattle feeders. Bought out by Informa, but they do a lot for giant ag business. Okay, back to the FOIA documents. We rely on the Informa study for insights as to how the industry may respond to a perceived change in gypsum authorities. We begin with those costs from Informa. Now turn to the USDA Chief Economist, Joe Glauber, and his role in killing the gypsum rules. USDA has hundreds of economists, a whole branch of Economic Research Service. There are some darn good economists there, conscientious economists, but anything that comes out of ERS has been sanitized. But Joe testified to the Senate Ag Committee on the proposed gypsum rules in June of last year, and implicitly referred to the Informa study and other industry-funded studies when he said people who have written the comments and submitted them show significant cost on the order of billions of dollars. There's no question that the designation on the rule will be changed to economically significant. FOIA documents. With a date a week later, a 3-pager from Joe Glauber showing outstanding understanding of the biases inherent in the reports that he had just relied on. Just a few quotes. The draft CBA reads more like a summary of comments than a cost-benefit analysis, where each of the economic inputs should be scrutinized and adjusted. Accepting both studies without such scrutiny is problematic and misleading. Well, it just did. Misled Congress. Even the discussion of the GAO report, and a lot of you are familiar with that, and some OCM members even met with GAO, gives short shrift to the studies that found competitive harm and emphasize those that showed that there was not competitive harm. Okay, more, the Informa data is likely skewed toward higher cost and does not reflect the benefits or costs in other segments of the industry. Dudley had a heck of a battle with the internal economist who relied on the Informa study, the RTI study, which taxpayers paid $4.5 million for, which was intended to look at the whole captive supply issue. And USDA administrators and undersecretaries said we're going to go out to independent group, business colleges or something else to get a fresh look at it. They hired RT International. RT International hired as consultants the livestock economists that had produced all of the other studies. So it's troubling that the government economists are relying on the packer and integrator and ag business funded studies by economic hitmen. They chose to ignore information submitted by OCM and a lot of others. The competition workshops, some of you attended many of those, so I won't go into details, but just recently, Department of Justice came out with a 24-page report summarizing the workshops and stated over and over, even leading up to the workshops, that the purpose was to learn how to best promote free and fair competition in agriculture. Attorney General Holder said this many times, Secretary Vilsack said it many times, even Christine Varney said, we want to learn how to promote free and fair competition. Notice that goes back to the original wording and the original intent of the antitrust law of free and fair competition. Is this cheap talk or meaningful? The word fair or unfair appears in the 24-page report 13 times. Cheap talk 12 times, and only once honest. And I quote, "The antitrust laws focus on competition and the competitive process and do not serve directly other policy goals like fairness." So they had all of this cheap talk about fair markets and so forth, knowing that the current interpretation of antitrust law excludes that. And Dudley's talked about the attempt to give meaning to the words unfair and deceptive, and what happened to that. The conclusion of the report is that the Department of Justice report is, we are better positioned to lend our expertise to promote free and fair competition in agriculture. There you go again, free and fair. We're better positioned. Okay, they're better positioned. Are they going to do anything? The one very positive implication of this report is, in my opinion, for the first time in history, the Department of Justice, at least the people who wrote this report, showed understanding of the complex and subtle competition issues in agriculture. Before this, I don't think they did. So the workshops served a purpose that really trained Department of Justice on the real issues in agriculture. Will they do anything? Can they do anything? They're greatly limited. The budget, combined budget of the Department of Justice Antitrust Division, Competition Bureau of FTC, something like $250 million a year. Agriculture is only 10% of the economy. So if you divide it up proportionally, they only have $25 million a year, and they have to do numerous studies on the merger analysis. Even if they're ignored, they have to do that. So there's just not many resources. Department of Justice tried to take on Microsoft many years ago, put all of their resources into that, and essentially lost, so they're reluctant to go after another big one. Government investigators, economists, and attorneys have been under cubicle arrest on and off over the years. Some have been explicitly prohibited from attending OCM meetings, but they were allowed to attend NCBA and other meetings. Competition investigations have been buried. There's the issue of what economists call agency capture. That's when a regulatory agency is captured by the industry they're supposed to regulate. That has happened. There's a revolving door. Alan Giebert says, ain't no door. It's a big wide hallway with a lot of traffic going both ways. There's no door there. A lot of truth to that. But you also see some government agencies infiltrated by the free market ideology espoused by a segment of the economics profession. And legislative thuggery, that, and Dudley has pointed to this, that the antitrust cops are forced to back away from investigations, or their efforts defunded, and even investigators face a very real threat that if they undertake a large investigation, like investigating the fertilizer cartel, and OCM in the last 2 years have met with top USDA people, top Department of Justice people, and top FTC people. And you know, what I surmise from that is that there's a very real threat that their funding will be cut if they initiate an investigation. It's through appropriations. So Congress, rather than legislating in an open, transparent way, are doing it through appropriations. And in my opinion, it's a bipartisan problem. So I think regulatory failure is not necessarily due to the failure of the regulators to do their job, but it's due to corporate control of government. And there are many different faces to the economic and political power imbalance that shows up in market transactions, cubicle arrest of the regulators, threats of funding cuts, and more insidious going through time, it shows up that the rules of the market game are influenced by corporate interest, and the rules of the game are made in their favor, which often works against you. So I hope this gives a little insight into regulatory failure and why it happens. There are highly competent economists and competition attorneys in government. Some of them are conscientious, but there's very little they can do. That is a symptom, not the disease. The disease is the corporate control of government. Thank you.